Oh, welcome back. We are going to work on line weight. Line weight is a way that often graphic designers, illustrators, artists, animators bring life to their line art, where they go from thick to thin. Usually they go thick into places with shadow where the light is not reaching, it gets a little darker. Since we haven't really discussed value yet, we're going to keep it pretty consistent. We're going to use Mr. Potato Head here as an example. And what we're going to do is we're going to thicken anything that's on a bottom part or a bottom detail of this toy. So what I had you guys do was to outline everything with a fine tip marker. We're using the Sharpie brand just early on in drawing, but in more advanced classes we'll use nicer pens like Microns or Pitt pens. But what we're going to do for that is you're going to outline the whole thing. Now, if you hold one of these pens too long, it's going to bleed and you're going to get little bumps and little dots. And so we don't actually want to use this one for the thickness. Instead, we're going to use a precise point pen. I like the Pilot brand example of this, but also when you get into more advanced classes, we'll use smaller versions of Microns or Pitt pens, and it makes a smaller, sort of cleaner line. It too will pull, but it pulls a lot slower. So what we're going to do is go in and look at all of the details that would be 3D. So I don't have a Mr. Potato Head sitting here in front of me, but if I did, I'd be looking at it and I'm trying to look at what parts are 3D. So they're not flat or painted onto the surface. So his hat, we're going to start at the top. The top, of his hat is going to be where the light hits. So we're going to look at not the top part of the ridge, but instead we're going to look at the bottom part here, right, of his hat. So we're going to be always looking at bottom parts here, and we're going to go from like thin to thick. When something becomes more vertical, we want it to be skinnier. When it is the bottom edge a little bit more horizontal, we're going to make it a little bit thicker. And so that will start to make it look like it's popping off of the head of the potato head. His eyebrows are already filled in, but if they weren't filled in, I'd probably do the bottom ridge here. The eye is a really good example of how we're going to do transition. So for his eyes, we're going to go in here. We're going to add some line thickness. Notice I only kind of go one line width or two line widths at the most, and I want to do a gradual transition. So I'm going to go make the line get thinner here. And so I want to go from thick to thin so that it looks 3D, looks like it's in shadow. So when it's a vertical, it's a single line. When it's starting to become more horizontal, I want to go in and give it some thickness. All right? So I'm just going to go in here and add dimension. The bottom tip of it's going to be the thickest part. I'm going to go up to the ridge here. Now I wouldn't do any more of his eyes or nose because now this is a top and this is a side, so I'm only doing bottoms. All right. I made a little mistake here. I went a little bit too far out. So the nice thing about this pen is I can kind of go in and just kind of clean up that edge. I can almost make these have a little bit more thick to thin too, these bottom edges here. So I'm not going to do too much more talking here. I really just want to go in here. So I'm going to kind of try to finish this up just like you would. Now if we go a little too thick, like I have this little divot here, and try to clean it up. And if it still seems too thick, I don't use whiteout. Whiteout is chunky and nasty and not art materials. But there are some other things like white ink that we can go in, kind of clean up any minor issues. But if we use too much of it, you're going to see it. so I gotta do the bottom part of his glove. Those are all tops of his fingers, so I wouldn't do anything of that. His ear, this is a ridge of the ear, so there's this part of the cartilage that comes out. So actually this is a thickness too, so I would do this bottom part here. Oop, made a little mistake, so I'll have to clean that up. So as you can see, as I walk away from it and go grab a plain one, you can see that he looks a little bit more three-dimensional now. He's got that sense of line weight to it. Let's see if I zoom out here. Oh, won't let me zoom out. Recording. Oh, darn it. All right, see if we can do it here. Be able to see the difference between our potato heads now, right? He looks more three-dimensional, right? So you're going to want to take your time and do a good job to make it look as clean and precise as possible. Now that I'm comparing the two, I see a little areas where I can go in here and fix so that we keep his shape nice and clean, right? So we're always refining, always making better. I hope that helped.